All right, everyone, welcome to our Uranus Retrograde in Aries class. Before we get started with our class information, first of all, a few housekeeping slides. Here at EAN, you can study with us 3 different ways. You can listen to our weekly audio podcast. You can enroll in our Astro Library. And of course, you can also become a registered student in our multimedia course. Whoops, I gotta get my mouse working. Here is a little more information on our Astro Library. It contains a dozen plus years of astrological lectures, workshops by myself, other evolutionary astrologers. You can see we have it divided into 3 different sections. You can enroll 1 month, 6 months, 12 months, or a monthly recurring that you can change at any time. Here's our multimedia course, which you can see we have 3 different segments that you can enroll through and get the actual DVDs, the materials binders. You get access to 250 plus hours of our audio files. However, we also now have segment 1 and 2 completely online, which you can access from any internet-friendly device. If you want the segments online only, they're $200 per segment. You can also go to our website, and we have an option to get the physical materials and all of the online access as well. We also have monthly classes on segments 1 and 2. If you're new to EA and you'd like a sample class download, you can contact us. We'd be happy to send it to you. All right, so we are going to look at Uranus retrograde in Aries from July 26th through December 25th of this year. Uranus is going to go retrograde at 20 degrees Aries, 30 minutes, and it's going to go stationary direct at 1633 Aries. And just for a little tidbit for you, because you were so patient with me coming on, I have my Jupiter at 16 Libra, 44 minutes, and I have it conjunct Mars, Mars's new phase at 20 degrees Libra, 2 minutes. So I have Uranus opposing my Jupiter-Mars 3 times this year, transiting Uranus in my 3rd and my natal Jupiter-Mars conjunction Libra 9th house. Teacher with all of the details. Here's the Sun-Uranus synodic cycle. I usually go from conjunction to conjunction. However, when we move into Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, sometimes they can enter shadow, where they first enter that stationary direct mark before we even have the conjunction here. So I put brackets in. Here's Uranus' first passage from the time it goes into shadow to its retrograde. And then here's where it turns retrograde on July 26th, the opposition to the Sun, the halfway point, and all the way back to when it goes direct on December 25th. That's the second passage reversing retrograde. And then here's the third passage, and Uranus goes out of shadow April 10th of 2016. So you can see when we start to get to these outer planets, from shadow period to shadow period, those 3 steps it traces, it actually does that beyond 1 year. This is how we can start to get planets having 5 retrograde aspects over and with a natal planet. And so you'll have these dates to refer to for yourself. Here's a visual on how the retrograde looks in the backdrop of the heavens. As the Earth's orbit is within the orbit of Uranus, as it starts moving faster, this is what appears to create this retrograde phenomena when Uranus appears to go backwards in the sky. It's actually the Earth picking up speed and traveling faster than Uranus that creates that apparent retrograde motion. A little bit of Uranus astronomy. I'm going to go over this fairly quickly. Revolution around the sun and the zodiac, 84 years. It means that it is retrograde about 5 months annually, or 42% of the calendar year. The retrograde period is 155 days. Stationary is 6 days, meaning Uranus will slow down. When it is getting ready to go stationary retrograde, it will appear to stand still in the sky for 6 days. It will do the same thing when it slows down to go stationary direct as well. Uranus is known as an ice giant made up of methane, hydrogen, helium. It's almost identical to Neptune. It was one of the only planets to spin on its side in the solar system. However, we now know that Pluto does the same thing. In other words, most of us spin on the equator, being in the same plane as the solar system, sun, and all the other planets. Uranus and Pluto turn it 90 degrees. It spins vertically if we could look at it visually. Uranus actually is one of the other planets that have rings. Its rings are dust particles, large rocks. Its ring system is smaller. I have a little picture up here for you where you can faintly see its rings as it travels around the planet. Uranus has 27 moons. 5 of them are quite large. Here's the names. Every so often, Uranus is actually visible from the naked eye. Never in a city. You have to be really out in the middle of nowhere, in the dark, without any of the other stuff interfering in the atmosphere. 3rd largest planet after Jupiter, Saturn. 4th most dense planet after Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune. It has the coldest atmosphere in the solar system. Mythology. Uranus is the only planet whose name comes from Greek mythology rather than Roman. Uranos is a Latinized version of the Greek god of the sky, and I love this photo here. I've always thought this is a beautiful rainbow-colored photo. Briefly, Uranus was Father Sky in Greek literature, son and husband of Gaia or Mother Earth. Uranus and Gaia were the parents of the first generation of the Titans, 6 sons, 6 daughters, ancestors of most of the Greek gods. But there are no cults directly associated with Uranus that survived into classical times. Uranus unconscious, huh? His rule ended when his son Cronus, encouraged by Gaia, his wife and mother, to castrate him, and he either died from the wound or withdrew from Earth, depending upon the different mythological stories. Uranus in Aries. When it moved into Aries in 2010-11, it initiated a brand new 84-year cycle through the zodiac. As you can see here, Uranus will move into Taurus 2018-19. We've got Uranus about 2/3 of the way through its cycle in Aries. So we're really starting to get a grasp on what Uranus in Aries actually means and how it is manifesting in our world. The last Uranus cycle, this information is from last year, and I decided to leave the slides in. I'm not going to go through them in detail. You can just see this on your screen, and you can refer to this when you get the PDF of these slides. The last time Uranus was in Aries was 1927 through 1934. And during that time period, Uranus in Aries made 5 last quarter squares to Pluto in Cancer. These happen between 20 to 24 degrees, And this, of course, was part of the 1930s Great Depression. We'll be looking at the U.S. chart here later on, and so we can look at how these last quarter squares compare to the first quarter squares of 2012-2015 that we're just finishing up. More things that happened the last time Uranus was in Aries. There was a lot that was taking place in the early fields of quantum physics, and there was a lot taking place in the world of economy, finances, money, and of course we have a lot of technological things and sociological things that will come through with Uranus cycles as well. Here's one more. You can kind of glance at a few things that were going on right there, and you could see that Jung was in the heyday of a lot of his writing, or really starting to take off with it. Now, Uranus is the archetype of the individuated unconsciousness or the unconscious mind versus Mercury, which is the conscious mind, left brain. Individuated unconsciousness contains the past in all its detail, this life and past lives. It also contains whatever we want to suppress in the present moment and we want to ignore, avoid, not deal with. This is the realm of Saturn, the individuated consciousness. Saturn pushes it below the surface, Uranus pushes it back up. Uranus is also, as the individuated unconsciousness, the blueprint to the future. And when it comes to future-orientated messages, you pay attention to the element of repetition, whether it comes through clairvoyant, clairaudient, or clairsentient. If you get the message 1 or 2 times, it's fantasy, wishful thinking, or way down the road, 10, 15, 20 years into the future. The more repetitious it is in regards to a future-orientated message, the more that it means it is the direction that you need to find the courage to move forward with now. Most souls have fear of changing directions. We project that past forward in order to be secure. Uranus, of course, in traditional astrology is always friendship or the like-minded souls that we all want to gravitate to. This generates a feeling of security when we find others that study astrology and we can talk the same language, or say Republicans versus Democrats, whatever it is. Groups are always like-minded souls. However, the Uranus archetype, in its deconditioning and liberating, requires us to also learn how to be a group of one. That is the Leo polarity to Uranus's rulership of Aquarius. Now, the archetype of liberation within the soul exists here, and essentially it is to become who we uniquely are as an individual soul. It can be way too easy to get caught up in friendship and to get caught up in all of our groups and then go with the flow of the group. Sooner or later, you're going to have alienation from the group, to be a group of one and to find yourself. This energy is emphasized whenever Uranus travels through the archetype of Aries. Of course, as we stated, Uranus rules electricity, technology. In general astrology or traditional astrology, Uranus rules astrology. Uranus rules the brain, central nervous system, co-ruler with Mercury of the nervous system. And Uranus in the brain rules those dendrites. Whenever we take in new knowledge, the brain has to find new pathways to travel. And so synapses fire up and they land in what's known as dendrites, and the dendrites then store the new information. So Uranus has rulership of dendrites and synapses in the brain. And you see this message down here. I got to give credit to Joe Dispenza, Evolve Your Brain. I think that was his name of his book. What wires together, fires together. And this is why we can get to be so repetitious in all our patterning. And the purpose of Uranus is shaking it up. And anytime Uranus is retrograde in any archetype of the zodiac, it is going to shake it up, allow us to break free. Uranus is also that archetype of trauma, both in this life and past lives. And trauma is when there has been an intense disturbance to our world in any way, spiritual, mental, emotional, physical, that's what I call SMEP. And so it comes through shocking events, or it comes through stress, and it creates a lasting effect. And that lasting effect can become known as post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, from the perspective of evolutionary astrology, we feel that 85 to 90% of souls are born with past life trauma from shocking events and situations in past lives. There was a news report today about how they are finding Vietnam vets after the war. It's 40 years after the war. And what did they say? A third of the Vietnam vets were still suffering PTSD. So this is breaking free with Uranus in Aries to be a brand new field of study and therapy. As we've been through the dozen years of war in Iraq and Afghanistan, the PTSD is becoming a household name. And now they're coming through with learning to recognize that there are such lasting effects to war, Uranus in Aries, and that there really needs to be a concentrated effort to heal in this way. Back in the early time periods, as the patriarchy was just arising, there would be ceremonies called cleansing of the swords, where the tribe would actually consciously work with the warriors to help them heal the traumas of what they experienced in war. We've long, long, long stopped doing any of that. And so when we do have trauma and we ignore it, it creates subconscious behavioral reactions. And those subconscious reactions dictate how we behave. So here's those OCD complexes. Here's all of the mental disorders that you see on the screen that we just unconsciously, subconsciously repeat over and over and over again. Just stop for a moment and consider, what are your patterns? What are your patterns that create these repeating behaviors? As we are looking at Uranus getting ready to turn stationary retrograde, you can have these types of patterns and behaviors really click for you in consciousness. And you can break free. You can change that pattern. You can make the effort to consciously heal the trauma. Now, the efforts to change the effects of trauma, it's basically making it conscious, making yourself aware of it, and processing through the whys and wherefores. It is what we would call in our world past life regression therapy. This is not generally accepted in your traditional psychological, sociological therapies. We can also make that effort to consciously change the behaviors. That, again, this is the beauty of Uranus, changing directions, retrograde and direct. We can make the effort to not suppress Saturn, that trauma. All right, why am I doing this one more time? What is it within me that's creating it? How do I change it? And of course, there are all kinds of alternative and traditional therapies to heal trauma. And as we are moving through Uranus in Aries, there are breakthroughs in new ways of practicing and addressing these traumas. Uranus in Aries initiates new cycle on individual and collective levels. Consensus, approximately 7 out of 10 souls on planet Earth, consensus state of consciousness. There's a tendency to repeat cycles. We can't step outside the time we're born into. We don't learn from history, so we repeat it again and again and again till we figure it out. There can be, because Uranus in Aries comes along and creates so much change and initiation, there can be strong desires to cling to the past for security reasons. It is what makes us feel secure. When Uranus has us leaping forward, it's very easy to feel insecure. And so what will happen is we'll change in some areas and we'll resist changing in other areas. So wherever Uranus in Aries feels exciting and fun and comfortable, we want to go forward that way. Wherever Uranus in Aries pushes buttons, makes us feel uncomfortable, insecure, we resist. And Uranus, when it turns retrograde in Aries, throws this up topsy-turvy. We don't have any choice sometimes with Uranus but to really make those efforts to move forward. And if you pay attention to those future-orientated messages with Uranus that start to repeat themselves again and again and again, if you make efforts to move forward in those directions, you will lessen, minimize, or abort the shocks, traumas, and upsets. The Uranian lightning bolts and upsets come when we're not paying attention to the future-orientated messages. Now, Uranus in Aries is going to want complete freedom to move into the unknown however we choose to do so. However those future-orientated messages come along that we feel comfortable with. One of the things that can happen, though, with that archetype of Aries is we can race ahead. We can try to skip ahead of the process. And whenever a planet skips ahead of the process with Aries, you have to go back and repeat it. You have to go back and do it again. This is where Saturn comes in as a helpmate to Uranus. What is the step-by-step process that we must take to get from point A to point B to achieve the goals and the visions and the images that Uranus brings to us? When Uranus turns retrograde in Aries, this is where we have to slow down racing ahead. This is where we have to take a deep breath and do some considerations of how we want to move forward rather than doing it the same way that we have been doing it in the past again and again and again. So, Uranus in Aries, trauma and PTSD can be either re-imprinted. Aries, argumentative, warlike, confrontational, anger, frustration, all of those Aryan archetypes that will come through when we don't feel we have our freedom. Those things can create a combustion that has us re-experiencing our PTSD patterns or our trauma patterns. And so as Uranus turns retrograde and goes through the retrograde, it becomes important to take a deep breath, to be able to do that Uranian detachment, step back and notice things so that we can become more and more conscious of the trauma and PTSD, and then make the changes to throw off the trauma. All the way through Uranus in Aries, there will be technological breakthroughs, and there can be issues, health and wellness issues that come up in the orb of the brain, the head, blood, muscles, nerves, anxiety, stress, impatience, restlessness. Uranus rules stress in general. It co-rules it with Mercury as co-rulers of the nervous system. With Uranus, it can have a real strong impact on the brain. And we can get into Uranus, Aquarius, 11th house is fixed air. We can get into this circular thinking, OCD complexes. Aries wants to throw it off. And if it represents our story or security, it can be hard to throw it off. We might end up with the nervous breakdown to break free. And of course, anytime Uranus is in Aries, technology races forward faster than we can stay ahead of it. This is 2015. Just think back for a moment to the kind of phone you had in 2008, 2009. Look at how much just the technology of phones have changed in the last 5 years. How many of you got emails off your phone 5 years ago? When Uranus goes retrograde in Aries, we have a review of these technological leaps forward. Which ones do we want to adopt? Which ones are moving us forward beyond what we can understand and work with from a morality perspective? For instance, did you know that there are some racehorses, and I don't know if they're the owners or investors or whatever, but there's a racehorse that has actually been cloned almost 30 times. Expensive racehorses, and then they're out there siring those racehorses. So if you look at that whole technology of medicine and what we can do now, where's the morality along with it? And this is what will be reviewed again when Uranus goes retrograde. We also will have immense unrest on social levels all over the place. Ultimately, it's about societies, cultures, individuals breaking free from the past. Many times it's exposing all of the patterns and rules from the past that no longer serve us. All we have to do is look at the whole issue of the incarceration rates of blacks, the racial profiling, all of that stuff. Here's a little detail for you. The U.S. has 5% of the world's population. We have 25% of the world's prisoners. Look at the disproportional rate in which we have there. By the way, the Uranus-Pluto squares, they always, if you look back in history, we had a Uranus-Pluto 3 conjunctions in the 1850s, right before the Civil War in Aries, and it led to the Civil War. The 1960s, we had a lot of the counter-revolutions and the civil rights movement. This time you can see the LBGT movement, but you also see all of the black movements in the news as well. There's an association with groups of people, Uranus. with the control Pluto, Capricorn. So when Uranus turns retrograde in Aries, the social unrest can increase. We can also have the breakthroughs via the Libra polarities of being able to consider the group in new and different ways than we have from the past. Uranus in Aries emphasizes that courage to decondition and liberate ourselves and be who we uniquely are, to break free from the consensus conditionings, to be ourselves, not follow the crowd or the group or pretend to be and do what everybody else is doing. Just because they jump over the cliff doesn't mean I have to. It keeps us free to actualize our true destiny, and it will bring out a whole new wave of individual leaders, or I have a Barack Obama sample here later, leaders that take the next level, stepping up to the plate. Again, Uranus is now 2/3 of the way through Aries. It's going to go retrograde at 20 degrees. And so what this means is that these new beginnings, these new patterns that all of us are in process of generating and creating, they're becoming more and more conscious. Look back to the beginning of this decade, to the end of last decade, 2009, 10, 11, and look where your world was back then, and look at the new beginnings that you made, and look at how much you have moved forward with them. From just a purely technological basis, Leroy and I, and when the economy tanked in 2008, in 2009 we had to release our full-time assistant. I had employed her for 10 years, 5 of them full-time. As I look back on it, I can see that a lot of the labor that she used to do, and I might add did so good. She had good Aries in her chart. She was very self-motivated. A lot of the work she used to do is now computerized. Leroy and I took it over, and we don't do it anymore. Technology changing again. Now, look at how we've changed teaching astrology. You know, you used to have to show up live in person. You used to have to travel long distances on an airplane or wherever, or across town in big cities. Then we went to conference calls and the teleconference calls of doing it audio, on an audio level. Now look at how more and more and more astrologers in any type of learning modality is going online and doing it through webinar services such as these. Now, for each of you personally, you can look at what house Uranus in Aries is transiting through. And I do have some bullet points on the 12 houses at the end of this slideshow for you. But you can just take an intuitive moment here and go. As Uranus is moving through XYZ house, how am I more aware of that house archetype? The energy that goes with that house, and how I'm working with that energy, how I'm evolving that energy. Retrogrades, you'll go to the opposite house. Libra's going to be there somewhere. You're going to get messages and information from others that can help you further refine your Uranus in Aries liberation through the transiting house. I put this in all of the planetary retrogrades. Going to go through this pretty quickly as well. Why retrogrades? The principle of psychological compensation exists wherever we are compensating on our own true nature. we will pretend, again, Uranus ranges from the avant-garde, those who are absolute complete rebels leading the way. The other extreme is those who are the rabid defenders of the past. It was never as good as it was yesterday. And of course, then there are those that are in the middle that sway back and forth and ebb and flow, depending on what's most popular out there with all the groups that they're relating to. So that group in the middle can be compensating on who they are and where they really need to be. The other extremes can compensate as well. Those defending the past, they don't want to look at doing anything differently. So they're compensating on their own growth. And the avant-garde, they can be to the extreme of any time the rest of them start to pick up and do it, gotta move again, gotta be on that leading edge. They're compensating on being able to integrate. So when you look at where somebody is compensating, you look to the status quo, you look at the archetype, its sign house aspects, you look at the evolutionary state of the soul and their environmental conditionings. And planetary retrogrades are how we break out of the status quo, how we break free from all those compensations that we're conditioned into. It's a geocentric phenomena. Retrogrades are always more powerful because the planet is closer to Earth when it's retrograde. Planetary retrogrades withdraw from that status quo again to redefine. Retrograde planetary archetypes are always evolving, always changing, regardless of what planet it is. So the sign in the house will define the manifestation of the retrograde. The opposite sign of the house provide clarity, expression, objectivity. Bottom line, answers to retrograde lessons always come from within ourselves. Of course, if you have a natal planet retrograde, you're learning that lesson throughout an entire lifetime. So for those of you who were born with Uranus retrograde, 42% of the time, 42% of us, you throughout this lifetime are trying to throw off all your conditioning patterns and liberate into essentially who you are. And as Uranus goes retrograde, you're going to have a temporary harmony and balance with that. When a transiting planet goes retrograde, all of us are going to be learning the retrograde lesson, whether we have it that way natally or not. Any of you born with Uranus stationary retrograde, just before, just after, it's an intense energy. It's pushing you to review. Uranus will not let you settle into status quo no matter what. But it also can be hard to move forward because you've got to put the energy into deconditioning, throwing off. If you're born with Uranus stationary direct, just getting ready to turn direct, just getting ready just after turning direct, it means you've spent most recent past lives working on deconditioning, and you are going to progress forward in this lifetime. The universe supports you and pushes you forward. When Uranus is retrograde in Aries, it points towards Libra. And so this is where we can slow down, lessen, calm down that feisty Aries energy with Uranus. That consideration of the other becomes stronger and stronger, whether it's on an individual level or a collective level. And what Uranus needs to do with the Libra polarity point is it really needs to slow down long enough to listen and to not just hear what somebody is saying outside of us. It also is learning to listen inwardly. We are all in relationship to ourselves. What is your higher self saying, feeding back to you?
What's your frustrated self feeding back to you? What is every aspect of yourself feeding back to you? What's the self-talk? Can you listen inwardly as well as listen outwardly? It will evolve relationships. Uranus retrograde in Aries is going to point towards compromise, getting along, finding a way to hold common ground or the energy of the circle. This is going to give us insights into recognizing how our actions will affect others. Uranus in Aries, I've got to be me. Yes, you do. Retrograde Libra polarity, you don't operate in a vacuum. How do your actions affect others? What is the feedback that you get from others in regards to actions? This is going to help us to, again, balance that group energy, whether it's one-on-one or whether it's a major group that we are a part of. And it will help us by that listening, okay? And listening outside of ourselves to others. We can be helpful in the individualization process with others. Others will be helpful in letting us do the same thing, helping us do the same thing. So that Libra polarity point of Uranus retrograde points towards being helpful versus self-centered and willful. Uranus retrograde in Aries will also point towards evolving and liberating any groups. Again, look at how police behavior in the United States is changing. The technology of having all policemen wear cameras is part of the body cameras. This is Uranus in Aries. And as Uranus goes retrograde with Libra, we've just had another situation where a black female was pulled over in Texas for changing lanes and not using her turning signal. Escalated. She was imprisoned, and supposedly she committed suicide. Time will tell. They're investigating it as a murder. My point is that groups of people are going to come to the forefront when Uranus is retrograde in Aries, and they're going to organize, they're going to change, they're going to do things differently. It's the people marching in the streets as we're seeing in all kinds of different countries. We're not hearing anything too much about what's happening in Greece since all of the news that's been out there, but you can bet your bottom dollar that because they are having to succumb to more austerity measures in the EU, the organizing in the streets is not done. What is it? 50% of black youth in the United States are unemployed. I think it's somewhere like 50 to 60% of youth, period, in many of the European Union countries are unemployed. There's no way they can better themselves. So expect to hear a lot of energy about different groups all the way through Uranus in Aries, emphasized somehow whenever it's retrograde. In the midst of that, though, here's another example. If you look at the whole fact that in the U.S., President Obama has normalized relationships with Cuba, going the route of compromise. Obama is a 7th house Pluto soul. He is a Virgo soul. He's a Pluto in Libra, Pluto in Virgo generation, but Pluto in the 7th Libra soul, and he is standing up to that compromise, compromising with the US and other countries with Iran and nuclear energy. So Uranus retrograde in Aries, it's when do we stand up for ourselves? If we've been on the selfless end, we're going to have to become more selfish. If we've been on the selfish end, we're going to have to consider the other more. Throughout it all, no matter what type of groups we're looking at, there is a search for the common ground. There's a need to find that common ground. We all live here on planet Earth. How do we coexist on planet Earth? It's the broadest way we are looking at the compromises when Uranus is retrograde in Aries. I mentioned before, in relative to the PTSD, all kinds of new therapies, especially mental therapies, take place with Uranus in Aries. New researching comes out that shows different ways of doing things compared to how we did them before. Initiations of new types of relationships. As you can see, here in the United States, we had marriage equality passed by the Supreme Court, or supported by the Supreme Court. This is a brand new type of relationship here for the United States. Uranus, exploding technology in the Libra polarity. Just look at it in regards to social media, Facebook, Twitter, instant messaging, everything coming through. I mean, who writes letters anymore? I got to give credit to my husband. He is someone who will actually fill out a thank you card, address an envelope, and put a stamp on it, and I really appreciate him for that. That is that careful, sweet human touch that we don't do anymore. Everything has just, again, become so electronic. When Uranus is retrograde in the Aries, pointing towards Libra, we can have a yearning for human touch, human interaction. We can have a yearning for socializing in our different groups. Now, this is just a nutshell. This is not a complete list in and of itself. If there is any Uranus archetype that you've not seen me address, or Aries archetype, please feel free to raise your hand and we can unmute you, or you can type into the Q&A board your questions. Leroy will answer them or pass them on to me. Going to start moving into some of the aspects that Uranus is making in its retrograde. First of all, in a nutshell, the inner planets. Look as we move through the last quarter of 2015. Sun, Mercury, Venus, Mars, all oppose Uranus in Aries from Libra. These oppositions take place from 19 degrees Libra down to 16. You can add on wide orbs, 2, 3, 4 degrees on either side of that. You see it covers, you could say 10 degrees of Libra Aries with these oppositions. Your Mars is traveling with the inner planets this year. Mars is a 2-year cycle, so 1 year it travels with the inner planets. The next year it has its own retrograde and it's opposite the inner planets. So as Sun opposes an outer planet, so do Mercury and Venus sooner or later, before or after, due to their retrogrades, and so does Mars when it has when it's traveling with those inner planets. So there is an emphasis here on being able to find balance between our personal need for both freedom and commitment. all individuals have a need to be free, to be able to do whatever they want to do. That's not only the Aries archetype, that is Uranus when it liberates on that soul level. But we also have a need for human relationship. We have a need for commitment. There's the Libra side opposite Aries. So there's an emphasis on reaching new levels of fairness with others as we ourselves are learning to balance our freedom and commitment. And if we're not reaching new levels of fairness, we have the great standoffs. We have the he said, she said, they said. All you got to do is look at collective American politics today and, that diametrically opposed stance that always exists between Democrats and Republicans in sometimes ridiculous ways. So there will be both inner planets and outer situations. Everything takes place out in our world. There will be all kinds of situations coming into consciousness for us. So with all these planets making oppositions to Uranus on an inner level, we're going to become more and more aware of what we want in any situation. How our words, thoughts, deeds, actions affect others. And so there is that consideration of others that is going to come to the forefront in our actions. On the collective level, this is going to lead into what is fair for all concerned. Can two opposing groups compromise with each other? This is what was going on between Greece and the European Union, or more correctly, the European Central Bank, and the European countries that have the power in the ECB. And they feel they've reached a compromise. Time will tell. Greece's debt is to the point it can't sustain itself. And the private central banking model of the European Union it's not sustainable. There's no ability for the governments to pay back all that is owed in interest. I still see where the rest of this decade, next decade, still going to be plenty of explosions. And one of them is going to be the fact that Uranus's transit through Aries is going to conjunct Eris 2016-17, approximately 22 to 24 degrees Aries. Now, specifically with the sun, here are the aspects I showed you before without the little brackets. Here is the highlight of the Uranus retrograde. The sun's opposition to Uranus, October 11th, 2015, sun 18.5 Libra, Uranus 18.5 degrees Aries. This is always the highlight of a retrograde cycle, the breakthroughs, the aha moments, I get what's happening with this planet. Sun is shining the light of day on that planet. Sun is on the point that planet is pointed to. And Earth, us, we're always right in the middle, so we can get it. We can understand it. Again, that consideration of the other that leads to new relating breakthroughs. Giving you examples with Cuba, with Iran and nuclear energy. We'll see how that turns out as time goes by with our U.S. Congress. But it comes down to a one-on-one level. Be it your intimate spouse and partner, be it a potential partner, be it, co-workers, could be parent-child with the other with Aries Libra has a wide, broad spectrum of who we relate to. So we either can reach a new level of balance or equality, or it's quite possible when Sun reaches the high point of opposing Uranus that if we're not making that effort to compromise and find common ground, then it breaks down into war, into standoffs, into inequalities. One group shows its power over the other group, which is what happened again with Greece here and the ECB. Essentially, what we are wanting to do is honor freedom in others as much as we would like to have it within ourselves. And in the midst of that, all of that Libran ebb and flow and ebb and flow and ebb and flow to find balance. Now, what's unique about Sun-Uranus is the fact that they are a planetary pair in ruling signs and houses that are polarity to each other on the circle. Sun rules Leo, Uranus rules Aquarius. So they're always going to have a planetary pair situation, regardless of the signs they're transiting, that says, how do I break free and create? Creative self-actualization is Sun. Liberation is Uranus. That ability to just really feel that we are a creative essence and dynamo on planet Earth. With these signs, it's going to be doing it through the medium of relationships. Inner relationship with ourselves, outer relationship with others. Mercury, I put in a few more details for you. Conjunction to conjunction, as you can see on the screen here. And then the fact that Mercury is going to come off its opposition to Uranus, and it's going to have a waning trine and 3 last quarter squares with its own retrograde cycle. Mercury will be in Capricorn, Uranus will be in Aries. Mercury could chances are, let me see here, chances are Mercury could be, nope, it won't make conjunctions to Pluto. It'll make one conjunction to Pluto, most likely after the retrograde. Don't quote me on that though. But your Mercury-Uranus, remember we said Mercury, conscious mind, Uranus, unconscious mind. So as a planetary pair, they're always in process of making what is unconscious known, conscious. So what we're going to have here is old thought patterns that need to be released, old communication patterns, old communications that just need to be made conscious. They don't serve us anymore. Let's let them go. And there will be new mental breakthroughs coming through. And we must make that concerted effort when we let go of the old way to really implement what fires together, wires together. We've got to implement the new ways to really see something come through so that we don't get sucked back into the old pattern. Now, Mercury here, as we look at these last quarter squares being in Capricorn, this is having self-responsibility. I create my world. How do I want to change how I create my world? What insights do I get from Uranus and how my world's no longer working? Substitute career for world. There could be career changes and things that go on. Look at how this comes through at the end this year, beginning of next year. So, all the New Year's resolutions can come around here. All of the desire to implement new ways of doing things. What we will need to be careful of here is Mercury in Capricorn wanting to be in control, be in charge. And if that is the case, Uranus in Aries is just going to bust out and we're going to find out we're not in control. Especially when a Mercury Capricorn retrograde points to polarity Cancer. We're going to have some feeling energy in here whenever we think we have to be the one in charge and telling everybody else what to do. Won't work quite so well. And this first Mercury last quarter square to Uranus is coming right before Uranus turns stationary direct on the 25th. And so they're going to meet twice here on the Uranus stationary direct point is 1633, even the third one. So Uranus is its retrograde cycle is going to carry over here into the beginning of next year. And new calendar year, you really would want to be making the effort to let go of whatever's no longer serving you, inwardly, outwardly, on mentally conscious levels, and then make those efforts forward. I thought I'd interject a chart right here for you. Barack Obama's chart, August 4th, 1961, 7:24 p.m., Honolulu, Hawaii, 18 Aquarius rising, 7th house Pluto Sol. But I thought I'd focus perhaps on the Uranus transit for you right here. I drew the transits for October 25th. Remember, Uranus here has an opposition, Mercury has an opposition to Uranus here. Here's where it is. So I just played with that and put this Mercury-Uranus opposition in Obama's chart. What I would say that I've been noticing, not only with the Uranus transit, but also the South Node that has been moving through Aries here for the last year, and in practical terms, he doesn't face a re-election. So you always find in that if we have an 8-year president in the United States, U.S. presidents can run up to 2 4-year terms. So they get elected. Everything the first 4 years is about getting re-elected. Then year 5 and 6, it's about getting their party re-elected. When we get into year 7 and 8 of an 8-year presidency, there's no re-election. Then the president moves towards creating legacy, perhaps she, in the future. So Uranus in that second house is self-reliance, being able to value self with 25 degrees of Aries in here. And so what we're finding is the fact that President Obama has been finding more and more and more backbone, 7th house Pluto, great compromiser. And you can see here natally, Uranus is conjunct the North Node pretty tightly, 25 to 27 Leo in the 7th house. That's his orientation. He tried that when he first got elected, and the polarity party, Republicans, just kind of filleted him. Well, now he's starting to come back out and show inner strength. He's finding that first house courage. He's looking at his own energy here. He's meant to continue moving forward here. Let's see here, 27 to 7. Yes, you could say it's a wide Pluto North Node conjunction. You could say he comes from this energy and he's meant to go towards this energy. But you still have a South Node, and you still have a South Node that activates. So Uranus here is going to turn retrograde as it's been making this passage, building up his self-reliance, his own value in himself and his role. This retrograde, here it is over here with Mercury. How does he communicate, negotiate, create those new commitments, etc., with everybody else, other countries, other individuals? I don't agree with how he's compromising with the Republicans on the Trans-Pacific Treaty or whatever that is. I do think that he is selling out the people there. Stay tuned. There'll be more on that in the news as time goes by. But there is, in essence, Uranus is creating an energy of really being able to value himself, second house, stand up for himself, bring through new talents, bring through his negotiating talents on new levels. And you can see how Uranus in the next few years, right before he leaves office, it's going to be close to making that waning trine here. Look for more of the Libran community, compromising, common ground part of the president to come through here. Now, moving on to Venus. As many of us know, we did a webinar 2 nights ago on Venus turning retrograde July 25th at 1 degree Virgo. The next day, July 26th, this is Saturday, Sunday, Uranus is going to turn retrograde here at 20.5 Aries. So Venus Libra as a planetary pair, liberation of self into our own natural essence. And as both of these planets are turning retrograde this weekend, brings up all kinds of things below the surface, especially in regards to relationships, into fairness and equality, into exposing where we don't have fairness and equality, and to just, whatever the status quo has been in relationships, it's not working right now, and we've got to be open to change. As you're looking here, what we do have through the Venus retrograde cycle is Venus is going to make 3 waxing trines to Uranus in Aries. So even though there can be many relationship upsets that might come through, the waxing trines bring out the potential of creativity just coming forth all over the place. And because Venus is going to go retrograde 3 times, we really have to honor our value system. Venus-Uranus can get so tempted and so excited. The new lover comes along and it can be, if there's any karma involved, it just magnifies it, and we can just be overly excited and burn it out twice as fast. And so we want to have an effort here. Oh, I'm just noticing the fact that 2 of the 3 waxing trines, Uranus is still retrograde. And so we want to be careful of, again, overexcitement, over pushing it forward, getting into the heat of the moment, and not really honoring our values, Venus. And so the way to figure out which ideas to follow through on, or which opportunities and relationships to follow through on, is pay attention to that element of repetition. All right? You have a partner, you've been going back and forth for a while, you've been in relationship for a while, you got some issues coming up, and can you figure them out? Can you work through them? what are those intuitive messages that come through? If you get the intuitive message that one of your most essence of values is something the partner doesn't agree with or doesn't want to make any effort with, it might be hard to carry the relationship forward. So there could be a lot of excitability in the relationship arena throughout the summer into fall. Saturn is retrograded back into the last 3 degrees of Scorpio. Saturn's going to go direct August 1st. So as Uranus and Venus are throwing everything up into chaos, how is Saturn putting its feet on the ground? Are you honoring your values and honoring your emotions? Having said that, there is potential to just have a beautiful expression of creativity between these two, of pleasure making between these two, of just being able to have fun. And of course you see on your screen the distortions, the love games, extremes of risk-taking, and then shocks of exposure if that comes through. Not to mention just, if we go into the extremes with Venus and Uranus of just having trauma re-imprinted and causing us to just feel, what's the use, doesn't work for me. When you have waxing trines, Leo to Aries here, you have to pay attention of taking the easy way out. And so anything around love, what's highest and best, what do I keep getting the message to do? Anything around creativity and career, what do I keep getting the repetitious message about? All right, Leroy, moving on. I'm going to take a drink of water. Any comments, questions from anybody?
No, not yet.
All right. Smaller group with Uranus, and you're all quiet, so thank you very much for listening to me. Oh, by the way, Venus-Uranus excitement, in case any of you don't know this. Do you remember Dances with Wolves? That came out back in 1990, I think it was. We're having the 25th anniversary of it. The Kevin Costner movie, where he was disillusioned after the Civil War, and he went west and ended up befriending the Indians and joining their culture, blah, blah. That movie was filmed in South Dakota. Some of it out on the prairie. South Dakota buffalo were in it. And then the winter scenes were filmed in the Black Hills. The fort scenes were filmed, I think, out on the prairie too. Anyway, it's one of South Dakota's most well-known movies because we were actually the stage. Kevin Costner didn't plan to film it in South Dakota, but when they came scouting for buffalo, they realized it was the perfect place. Well, social media has just been buzzing today because Kevin Costner's in town. He's been in Keystone. He's been down at our Main Street Square in downtown Rapid City, and he has been graciously allowing people to take selfies with him. So I've got all kinds of selfies showing up and texting showing up. Both of my sister's workmates saw Kevin Costner today.
My sister didn't see him, but both my sister's workmates did. There's Venus-Uranus excitement going on with a movie star. And I'm sorry if you guys, somebody from Hollywood's listening and you're yawning. Sorry. We're out here in the northern plains. We don't see many movie stars in our neck of the woods. So it's really nice having him back. I'm guessing that the South Dakota Film Society might be having something done with him for the 25th anniversary of the movie coming up this fall. All right, whoops, sorry, skipped over Uranus as I remembered my Venus-Uranus excitement. Mars-Uranus. Uranus is in the sign that Mars rules. As you can see here, I just did the conjunctions of the 2-year Mars cycle, and I just put in the aspects during the retrograde, the major aspects. Mars-Uranus, they are not the most compromising planetary pair. Mars in its opposite sign, maybe there's a little energy that direction. Inner planets, as we saw earlier in Libra, making the oppositions, maybe there's some energy in that direction. On the consensus level, this is just going to be standoffs. My way versus your way. Who can one up one another? What's necessary here is the action of listening. And perhaps on a more personal level, can you really listen to what another is saying to you? And if Mars and Libra can do that, it can calm down feisty Uranus in Aries. Mars has that potential to show that, Uranian need for freedom. Here's the effect it will have in your world. Here's the effect it will have on others. Here's how you can have some type of compromise. Now, as I told you earlier, my natal Mars is 20 degrees. I just realized this at the last minute before class, so I didn't put my chart in. My Mars is 20 degrees Libra, 9th house. And so Uranus going retrograde, 20.5 degrees Aries. I am feeling that feistiness of those two planets. Uranus is in my 3rd house. It's summer. I'm wanting freedom. And we have a Venus retrograde going on. Uranus retrograde. Next month we have Jupiter in Virgo. And my husband's been saying, why are you teaching classes in July and August? And I'm going, because that's when the planets are active. And I'm going, Uranus will go retrograde next July, but Venus won't be there. Jupiter won't be there. Jupiter going to Libra in September of 2016. So I love to teach, but I have my own frustration going on because I want to be outside. I want to be off doing this. Here's another thing. I haven't left the house in 4 days. Every so often I'll go, oh, wait a minute. I haven't been outside the house for a while. And I'm feeling a little stir crazy. And I told Leroy when I get done with class, I got to move. Even if it's just to go outside for a walk, I've got to have that energy flowing. And so when Mars, Uranus are butting heads, for all of us, there is just this rise in frustration. And the fact that they're in one of Mars's signs, and it's happening in Libra, Aries, it can emphasize the energy in regards to relationships. Can we breathe? Can we calm down? Can we see the larger picture of the group, Uranus polarity? Can we hear what another is saying?
And so as we look at Mars-Uranus in this planetary pair that's been going on, for the most part, Uranus is going to insist upon new ways of doing things. And Mars in Libra, while it must listen and take that into consideration, Mars in Libra must decide whether the new relationships or new relating patterns are too insecure and go to the standoff, or whether it can figure out how to compromise. Mars in Libra is a great compromiser, and it is group orientated. And can it figure out the new ways to move the relationships forward? Again, collectively, marriage equality, Cuba, Iran, me personally with Mars Libra 9th house, as I'm getting a year and a half of webinars under my belt, they take a lot of time. I appreciate all of you who are showing up, but it's hard for me to justify all the time to prep for class when it's small classes. So I'm having to adjust to the fact of, if I'm quote unquote listening, the 3 outer planets that spend multiple years in signs of the zodiac, it's not exciting to go to that class year after year after year. So most likely in 2016, I won't be doing Uranus retrograde in Leo or Neptune or Pluto because you've got this information to refer to. It'll change with the inner planets, but you've got the big picture here. So that's part of my adjustment in relationships as teacher. Uranus in Aries has been in my 3rd house. Well, look at, I've brought in a new way of teaching webinars. I love teaching this way. It's so much easier for me than the teleconference. I'm told I'm a good speaker, but when I can give you this visual, it just allows you to have a nice review. You don't have to be so rushed and getting all the notes down. You can listen to it again if you want to, but you can have the review quite easily. So I'm just showing you some individual example of how this particular aspect in Uranus retrograde in general can be taking place and changing things with that Libra polarity of relationships. Jupiter, again, conjunction to conjunction is a 13, 14-year cycle. And what we have going on here, as you can see, Jupiter has been making 3 waxing trines to Uranus, just like Venus. A lot of excitability, a lot of creative juices moving forward. There is no I just have been doing the major aspects again. No, there's a waxing sesquisquadrate. Stay tuned to the weekly podcast for that one. But the opposition comes the day after, okay? Uranus goes direct. Ooh, that needs to be stationary direct right there. I'll get that little thing changed on the slides for you. So there's, nothing that's direct while Uranus is retrograde. The 3 trines are before the retrograde. If we look at them as a planetary pair, the evolution of our beliefs as we decondition and liberate our soul. When Uranus breaks free from old patterns, it shifts everything in our life. And with Jupiter, it's going to shift our belief system. And hopefully we're going to break free and see evolution of that. And so looking at, you can see they had conjunctions and Pisces, Aries, 2010, 2011. Won't have the next one here till 2024. But as this has been moving forward, I think there was 1 conjunction in Aries and then the two back in Pisces. So it really had that first conjunction initiating in Aries. So now here's Jupiter a third of the way around the chart. There's a lot of creative potential right here coming through this year
continuing. Oh, wait a minute. I am correct. I saw the wrong year. 2016 is the opposition. All right, never mind my notes. That creativity, because Jupiter is building to Uranus until a year and a half from now. This is, again, all the creative explosions that we are seeing going on in so many different ways that just, again, literally makes it hard to stay caught up. Every so often, we're going to have to take a time out and just breathe and take a time out for relationships. You can see Jupiter's last waxing trine coming along with the Venus waxing trines. Yes, can we take time out for our relationships? One of the distortions that can come through with Jupiter Uranus is we either make these breakthroughs in liberation, or we can go into a lot of intellectual brainwashing. And this is many times a lot of what we'll see trying to happen on the consensus level. I know better than you, my way's better than you, and we try to convince and convert Jupiter. Saturn, many of you might recognize that Saturn has been making these waning sesqui quadrates to Uranus in Aries. We've already had 2 of them. We're going to have the 3rd one while Uranus is retrograde in October. This is that interplay between the individuated consciousness and unconsciousness. And so basically what these aspects will do, an exposure of individual and social lies, misinformation, so within ourself, in our interpersonal relationships, how it's existing out there with us, okay? Just look at Donald Trump and the Republican Party. Hey, you don't need movies. You can just watch them. Cannot believe the level of immaturity that's coming through in some of the things that's been going on with Republican presidential candidates. It's really showing the Pluto, balsamic Pluto in the U.S. chart. We're going to be adjusting to new understandings of our role. Waning sesqui quadrates is outer. What's our role in the world? What's our role in social groups, and what, on a collective level, how are social groups evolving and adjusting? A lot of these aspects right here, again, is the social justice issues that you see going on. Racial profiling in the U.S., economic and banking issues in Europe. You can pick your country. There'll be something that's going on in those areas in regards to social inequalities and bringing it forth in the news. You all know Uranus is finished up with the 7 waxing squares to Pluto, 2012 through 2015, 8 to 16, Aries, Capricorn. Uranus is now 90 degrees past, so the first quarter squares are going to gain momentum. All the ideas that have been coming throughout last decade, this decade, are now starting to manifest left and right. Uranus is going to be in orb of the first quarter square aspect through 2019. And when it goes retrograde, it comes back closer to Pluto. And Uranus retrograde and Pluto direct, because Pluto goes retrograde earlier. Pluto's going to go direct. Uranus retrograde and Pluto direct will get close, but not meet. But as they get close in their meeting, then it increases the tension of the waxing squares and the bust out of everything that's taking place out there on social collective levels.
many times on that consensus level of consciousness. The awareness of what needs to change comes after the aspects. There's a catch-up energy going through. Again, Uranus's input. How do we want to decondition, break free, leap forward from old realities within our soul? I mentioned this earlier, but here was the slide. It's next year, the next 2 years, 2016-17. Uranus will conjunct Eris between 23-24 degrees Aries. Henry Seltzer has a new book out on Eris, and this is the symbol that he has created for it. And there are multiple symbols. There are some European symbols going on with Eris. I think Henry's looks the simplest, cleanest. You know, most of the planetary symbols are pretty simple, recognizable. Some of the ideas for Eris are not so good. So if anybody thinks it's going to be calming down, guess what? These guys meeting in the sky, I couldn't find any better than a 10-day ephemeris on Eris. So I will do more research. Look, you know, here's a 2016 class, okay? In which we can look at how many times Uranus will actually conjunct Eris in these 2 years. Eris is going to hang out at 23-24 degrees Aries for quite a long time, but Uranus is going to move past it within 2 years. So chances are there's probably 5 conjunctions. And, you know, Eris is the planet of war and strife, but also archetypically, it is about breaking free. And it was discovered in Aries. And so this is just going to emphasize all of the social justice issues on collective levels all over the place. Wherever you find 23-24 degrees Aries in your chart is where over these 2 years you will be experiencing your own frustrations, your own needs to liberate, break free, move forward. Me, third house, it's going to be my detail overload. And Libra polarity point, figuring out how to balance some of my workload. So here, I put a few charts in just quickly. Many in evolutionary astrology use the Gemini rising chart, July 4th, 1776, 2:13 a.m., Philadelphia. Founders of the Declaration of Independence were Freemasons. They practiced astrology. They didn't know about the 3 outer planets. There are those that feel that after arguing it out, they all had to go to the pub and eat and drink. They ironed something out in the middle of the night, and it gave them Venus, Jupiter, Sun, 3 of the benefics in the 2nd house of resources. You can see the mom and apple pie here. You can see that Pluto has been opposing this area, squaring Saturn. Uranus has been opposing Saturn, squaring Sun, 2014-15. We're moving past that. This is part of all of the breakthrough that you are seeing going on. What's fair? Saturn and Libra. Are we going into fairness, or are we doing the 5th house elitism energy? There is a thought that because humans migrated out of Africa, they look at Africa as the motherland. So there is this thought that Cancer relates to Africa and Cancer relates to being black. And so look at the history in the United States as a Cancer sun and 4 planets in Cancer of what we have dealt with in regards to slavery and emancipation, and now working to move to more and more equality. Uranus, though, here, what I wanted to point out, and I think I have, I took that chart out because you can still see it here. Uranus is going to be moving into squaring. Uranus is going to start with Mercury, go counterclockwise around the zodiac, and Uranus is going to be into a last quarter square to Mercury here, and it's going to be doing that in the 2016-2017 time frame. Eris will be right here making the square too. So all of the 11th house Uranian issues of social justice and groups of people, everything is still, I don't see it backing off. And it's just, how are you going to choose to participate? How are you going to show up as an individual, Uranus in Aries, and be part of the group? 11th house, what groups are you going to be a part of? What groups are you going to be a part of with climate change on planet Earth? Mercury here in Potpourri is in the third house of communications. And so whose voices will be heard? How will the voices shake up our worlds? Where will we want to listen, and where will we want to reject what's being said and not listen? Cancer, third house, it's too uncomfortable. And where might it be coming through so strongly we have no choice to listen? You can see that Chiron's in here in a T-square as well. So what groups are going to feel wounded and want to break out of wounding? What groups are going to feel like the wounding is being re-imprinted? There's a lot that we could say about that. I just really, for the most part, want to call it to your attention. And then briefly, here is the U.S. Federal Reserve chart. December 23rd, 1913, 6:02 p.m., Washington, D.C. The inner circle is the Federal Reserve chart. The outer circle is, I think this is when Uranus makes the first square to the Fed Reserve chart, Mars. So for those of you who are not aware of this, the Federal Reserve is a private central bank. And thank you for allowing me to say this again if you've heard it before. In the history of the United States has been battles between the U.S. Treasury creating money, which is what the Constitution gave us, or giving that power away to the private banking system, who then loans it back to the government, i.e. the people, with interest that must be paid back by the people. We wouldn't have a Federal Reserve debt if we didn't have a private Federal Reserve. It's not an absolute, but most of that debt is owed to private central banking. So here's their chart. And you can see that there's quite a few planets at, this 19, 23, 27 degree mark that Uranus is going to be squaring, and that Pluto's going to come out after and then conjunct and oppose. So my hope is, and my soapbox is, over the next few years, having Uranus in Aries just expose the secrecy of the Federal Reserve, expose the lies that we've been told. Saturn square the nodes of the Federal Reserve chart, Mercury square the nodes of the Federal Reserve chart, Venus square the nodes, stealing our money. So hopefully Uranus will be able to expose this, and when Pluto follows along later this decade, next decade, it may be able to change it. Now here's another interesting chart for you. Here is the U.S. Gemini rising chart again. We look at it in EA with the ninth house Pluto and the country founded upon religious freedom. Also, a country that just is really wanting to have freedom in general. All right. Equality for its people. Moon is always the public. Here's the Federal Reserve chart around it. And so look at the Federal Reserve chart is the transits of when it was born. So look what was going on in the 1913. Saturn was in Gemini on this Uranus. Venus and Mercury, opposing the US, Uranus, and Mars. And the squares, to Mars that was going on. When I look at this bi-wheel, I just say lies, 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 lies. And Uranus was in Aquarius, and one of the archetypes of Aquarius is the social ruling class or elitism. And so here was Uranus taking over the freedom of the people here. We will tell you what is good for you. Jupiter, resources taken away from the soul of the country. Neptune, Mercury, more lies, more games, more shenanigans. Again, one more chart. Here's the tri-wheel of Uranus in the US Gemini rising chart in that 11th house. So here's Uranus waking up, hopefully, the communications, all right? And it's going to eventually square Uranus, not to mention what it's going to do to the Federal Reserve chart planets as well. And so it's my hope that Uranus, as it finishes up in Aries during this last or next 5, 6, 7, 8 degrees, there can be a lot more exposed in the way that we have monetary policies set up in the US and the way we can break out of them. Now, if you're new to this information and you'd like to learn more, I'm just touching upon it. You can go to publicbankinginstitute.org or webofdebt.com, or you can get Ellen Brown's book, Public Banking Solution Recaps What's in Web of Debt. Get both if you want it. But you can get on both of these websites. You can join this organization. Robert Gover, who, if those of you perhaps who may know of Robert being a guest speaker when we had our first webinar conference in the fall of 2013, Robert left us and went into spirit world this January of 2015. So I'm so happy that I reached out to him and connected with him and found his book before he left. He was a big fan of Ellen Brown as well. And I just encourage everybody to, if you want Uranian liberation on the broadest social levels, educate yourself on your country and whether you have a public central bank or a private central bank. And I go into a lot of detail on that on the 2 webinars that we did together, Time and Money, Past, Present, and Future, parts 1 and 2. And I always ask you, Leroy, where do they find these on the website? Section 3 of the Astro Library, correct?
That is correct.
Thank you very much. All right, I won't belabor that. You will have these charts to look at yourself. What I want to do here in our final few minutes is invite any questions and just briefly put Uranus retrograde in Aries transiting the 12 houses up here for you. I'm not going to go through and read them all. I'm just going to make them available on the PDF that you will receive. And if you watch again or you're watching now, you can at least see a glancing of your house. This is by no way an inclusive list. This is just a few nuts and bolts as you're looking at this. Here's me. Too much to do. Making choices. I made a big choice in our garden today on my too much to do list. Here it is in 5th and 6th for you. Leroy, any comments from you, honey?
No, pretty comprehensive job. This is just wanted to acknowledge you for taking all the time and putting all the information together. It is a real succinct representation of Uranus transiting the 3rd house for you. It's webinar format.
Yes. Emphasized by Uranus opposing 2 planets in my chart. Next year I have Uranus square my ascendant descendant. They don't get it this year, but they're close. And finally, these last 2 houses for you, so that you can see these on your screen and work with them. And so if I forgot to take these out of the tail end, so I'll move through those. If there are not any questions or comments, then I'd just like to make you aware that we did a Venus retrograde in Leo class, Virgo Leo, 2 nights ago. Leroy has done his Uranus details, and that I think he already has it up as an item on our website if you missed it.
Yep, the PDF's there with all the links as usual, and it was also a real great webinar, and the focus, of course, on relationships.
Mm-hmm. And in the meantime, you are welcome to join us in August. We will do a 2-part series on Jupiter in Virgo over the next year. The first part, we look at the archetypes of Virgo, Jupiter in Virgo. We give a little bit of overview on some of the major transits. And then the second part, I do take the time to go through Jupiter in Virgo, transiting through all 12 houses.
I'm looking forward to that one. Yeah, that's going to be exciting. Again,
Well, that one's going to be active for you because you have planets in Virgo.
Yeah, I got a Mercury-Jupiter thing hanging out there. Yes.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Thank you very much for taking time out of your summer schedule to learn evolutionary astrology with Leroy and I. And I wish you a beautiful evening and a smooth, exciting, liberating Uranus retrograde in your chart. All right, everyone. Adios.